Welcome to the Wife Stories YouTube channel. New video every day, and don't forget to subscribe. Here we go.
It's not your business. Those were her exact words. They fell like shards of broken glass between us. I remember how, years ago, she used to whisper something different. She would nuzzle up against my shoulder in the glow of our bedside lamp and call me her one and only. That was when she believed in us, or when I believed she believed in us. Now, standing in the doorway of our bedroom, she looked at me with hardened eyes, as though I'd pried open a diary I had no right to see. I stood there quietly for what felt like a full minute. My heart thudded so loudly it rattled in my ears. She didn't move. I didn't either. All I could think was, how did we get here? We'd been married 6 years. Just yesterday we were supposed to celebrate our anniversary. We'd planned a nice dinner, something low-key, a place that made good barbecue or even a decent pizza, and maybe share a bottle of wine at home like we used to. But she came up with another idea. She wanted some exquisite French place she'd heard about from a coworker. Said she needed more elegance in her life. I shrugged and told her fine. Pick what you want. I was never the fancy type, but I wanted to see her happy. Thought maybe that would put a spark back into whatever we were losing. We rarely spent money on ourselves, so I tried to be supportive. But that night, she said, let's do it on the weekend, not tonight. Gave some half-hearted reason. I felt the brush off more than I heard it. Something in her voice made me uneasy, but I let it go. I had no idea just how deep that uneasiness would go. I had no idea that the real celebration, the real dinner, didn't involve me at all. I remember coming home from work the next day. I'd picked up flowers, a token that probably felt more like an apology for something I couldn't name. The house was empty. No note on the counter. Nothing. I texted her, got a short reply. I'll be late. Meeting. Then I noticed a different dress was missing from her closet, something sleek and black that she usually saved for special occasions. Her best pair of heels was gone too. My chest got tight. It was so intense that for a moment I thought I might pass out. I had a friend once who told me, when something feels off, it's usually worse than you think. I'd never had reason to question her loyalty, but the older you get, the more your gut starts to connect the dots for you, and it was connecting them fast. I knew if I asked directly, she'd deny everything. She might have thrown those same words at me again. It's not your business. Or maybe she'd have conjured a more delicate lie. She was good with words. Marketing was her profession, after all. I decided not to confront her. Not yet. Instead, I got in my car and drove aimlessly around the block, scanning for something, anything. Most times, doing that only makes you feel more paranoid. But there I was, feeling like a fool but unable to stop. A few blocks from our neighborhood, I noticed her car merging onto the highway. I recognized the license plate. My knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. She was heading into downtown. I followed, keeping a bit of distance so she wouldn't spot me. I didn't want to do it. I was half hoping I was wrong, that she was just picking up a coworker or had to meet a client for an after-hours pitch, or some other boring, harmless story that would make me feel foolish for doubting her. She exited near the heart of the city, an area known for its pricey restaurants and boutique hotels. My stomach started to twist. She parked across from a French place with fancy lettering on the windows. I recognized the name. A restaurant rumored to charge the price of a motel room for a single glass of wine. I slid into a spot on the opposite side of the street. It was almost comical how out of place my old sedan looked among the black SUVs and sleek German-engineered cars. She got out, wearing that tight black dress that shimmered under the streetlights. My breath caught in my throat. She looked beautiful, almost heartbreakingly so. A million memories of us together flooded me. Casual Sundays in sweatpants, the two of us joking about the future, the way she'd gently squeeze my hand when we watched a sad movie. Somehow all of that felt like it belonged to different people now. She paused, glanced at her reflection in the restaurant's front glass, and adjusted her hair. Then she went inside, her heels tapping sharply on the pavement. 10 minutes later, I saw him. Couldn't miss him. A kid who looked barely out of high school with that swagger in his step. Tall, lean, handsome in a boyish way. The type of face that belongs in college brochures or on some campus track team, not next to a woman in her mid-30s who's been married 6 years. He slid into the same restaurant, scanning the interior until he spotted her. I sank lower in my seat, the seatbelt chafing my neck. For a while, all I could do was stare at the entrance. With every minute, my chest tightened. Anger, shock, betrayal, but also this weird sense of unreality. I felt like I was watching a bad movie starring people who looked like someone I used to know. Part of me wanted to barge in there, cause a scene. Another part of me felt paralyzed. I ended up sitting in the car for almost 2 hours. I watched as the time ticked by on my phone. My mouth went dry, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. At one point, I thought about texting her to see if she'd lie to me in real time. Thought about calling a friend to talk me down. But in the end, I just watched. They came out eventually, him holding her by the waist, as they both tried to stifle laughter. She looked intoxicated, not falling down drunk, but with that glow in her eyes that said she'd had just enough expensive wine to feel alive and reckless. I felt a deep punch in my stomach. She smiled at him in a way I hadn't seen her smile at me in years. A longing, youthful expression that made my heart twist painfully. I watched them walk to the curb where a rideshare pulled up. They got in together. I wasn't sure if I should follow. Everything in my chest screamed at me not to. The part of me that didn't want to see them slip into a hotel room or some cheap motel said, "Enough is enough. Don't break your own heart more than you have to." But I was too far gone. I swallowed back the taste of bile in my throat, started the engine, and let a few cars get between us as I tailed them down the avenue. The rideshare eventually stopped at a mid-range chain hotel near the outskirts of downtown. They both climbed out. He offered his hand, and she took it, pressing her body close to his in the process. She looked up at him with this grin. God, it still burns in my mind. It wasn't just lust. It was something else, something playful and free, like she'd just found the better version of herself in that moment. And that cut deeper than any physical act. I watched them slip through the revolving doors. The doorman nodded politely, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I almost rammed my fist into the dashboard. Instead, I forced my hands to remain on the wheel. My anger felt scorching hot, but I was trying to keep it under control. For a few seconds, I felt like I couldn't breathe. All I could think was, my wife. My wife. My wife is going upstairs with a boy half my age. I didn't go in. I didn't confront them. I just drove home, the streetlights blurring through the tears I tried desperately to fight back. Rage coiled itself in my chest, but underneath that was a sick, sinking feeling of shame, as if somehow I was the one who'd done something wrong. When I finally got home, it was after midnight. I slumped onto the couch, staring at the framed photos on the mantel. Happy times. Our wedding day, a trip to the Grand Canyon, a picnic in the local park. She called me her only one so often back then it felt like a vow. My throat tightened until I could barely swallow. I don't know when I dozed off, but her footsteps woke me just before dawn. I glanced at the clock. 4:10 a.m. The front door opened quietly, and she stepped in, shoes in hand. Her hair was mussed, her makeup slightly smeared. She tried to tiptoe past me, not noticing I was awake in the dark. I whispered her name. She flinched and turned. "That's when you say something, right?" I murmured, voice rough. Something like, "It's not what it looks like." She stared at me, eyes wide. For a moment, I thought I saw guilt in them. But she closed it off quickly, setting her lips into a thin line. "I don't want to talk about it." "Yeah," I said quietly. "I'm sure you don't." I got up, every muscle in my body tense, walked past her to the bedroom without another word. I heard her following, her bare feet padding against the floor. She started to say something, but she cut herself off. I stepped into the bedroom, peeled off my shirt, and lay down on the bed fully clothed from the waist down. My mind was a swirl of conflicting impulses. Confront her, shout, demand answers, or just bury it deep and wait for the morning. She stood in the doorway, exhaling shakily. Then she turned and went to the guest room. The door closed softly behind her. That silence was more deafening than any shouting match could have been. Morning came. We moved around each other with careful distance, like two strangers sharing a bus seat. She tried to act normal, brewing coffee, checking her phone. But there was tension in her jaw. Finally, I spoke. "We need to talk." She paused, a coffee mug in her hand. "Not now," she said, and at that moment, the phone in her other hand buzzed. She glanced at it, then quickly put it away. She took a breath. "I'm late for a meeting." I forced down a surge of anger. "What meeting?" She lifted her gaze. "It's a client. Doesn't matter who." Then she muttered, "It's not your business," and turned away. I stared at her for a moment, remembering the night before, the French restaurant, the hotel. Something inside me snapped, but I still kept my voice low. "Sure," I said softly. "Have a nice day." She looked back at me, eyes wary, like she was expecting a blow. I didn't give her one. Not yet. She nodded, grabbed her keys, and left. I was alone in the kitchen, watching the dust motes float in the early light. How the hell did we fall apart so casually, so destructively? That day at work, I was useless. My boss asked if I felt sick. I shrugged, told him it was a migraine. Went through the motions until the clock set me free. I drove around aimlessly, ended up at a sports bar, had a beer I didn't want. Thoughts churned in my head, swirling with every swallow. That sense of betrayal was like a knife in my gut, but behind it, a cold fury was forming. I didn't want to hurt her physically. My father raised me better than that. But I wanted to do something that would break her composure, make her feel the agony that was tearing me apart. I felt an ugly, vengeful side of me surfacing. It was surprising, almost alien, but I couldn't push it away. When I finally got home, I opened our bedroom closet and pulled out my wedding ring from its little black box. I hadn't worn it to work that day for the first time since the wedding. I sat on the edge of the bed, turned the ring over in my hand, imagining the shape of her lips saying that vow at the altar. Then I pulled out a piece of paper. I was never much of a writer, but in that moment I needed to pour something out. I started scribbling words I barely recognized. Something about how easily she sank us for a bottle of wine and a young body. Something about how you can murder love without even pulling a trigger. When I was done, I folded that note into a crude paper boat and flushed it down the toilet. I watched it swirl away, and an odd sense of emptiness washed over me. You can't flush heartbreak. But I wanted to. That was the night I found out more about her lover. A name I'd heard in passing from a mutual acquaintance. Luke Martinez, a kid from out of state, some college sophomore. Eager, energetic, the kind who probably wore cologne to the gym. I dug around online. His social media was wide open, full of flashy selfies, half-naked pictures at the beach, boastful lines about living life to the fullest. Scrolling through his feed made me feel both sick and furious. And then I found something buried in a local forum. A mention of allegations from a minor. The details were scarce. He hadn't been convicted, but apparently there was an incident last summer. It never went to court. Lack of evidence, or maybe a settlement. The more I read, the more my jaw clenched. He'd been in trouble before, had a hot-headed altercation or two. But it was the mention of an underage girl's accusations that really caught my eye. I leaned back in my chair, feeling my pulse spike. The line about insufficient proof lodged in my brain. That was the moment something clicked. If there was anything left in me of the good man I tried to be, it retreated. A wave of grim determination took over. When you discover that your wife is cheating on you with a half-grown jerk who's been accused of something vile, your moral lines start to blur. If I was going to ruin him, I wanted to do it in a way that guaranteed no slip-ups, no half measures. I wanted it to be permanent. I started my own quiet investigation. Put on my manager's voice at work and made a few calls. Talked to an old friend who had connections in the local police department. Kept it vague, but mentioned a potential open case. My friend couldn't give me official records, but he pointed me in certain directions. I visited a public records office, got what I needed. Dates, places, a few contacts who'd known Luke, a witness or two who might remember something. I collected everything into a neat little folder labeled Anonymous Tips. It took me 2 weeks to gather enough. During that time, I barely spoke to my wife. She was in and out, trying to pretend nothing was wrong, but we both knew everything was broken. Every time she flashed me a forced smile, I felt the rage coil tighter in my chest. I kept telling myself I'd walk away, file for divorce, leave her in the dust. Yet a darker part of me demanded more. If you think you're above revenge, wait until you watch the woman you love betray you. See how your mind changes. On a Saturday morning, I woke up early. She was still asleep, or pretending to be, so I slipped out of the house and drove down to the station. One of the cops on duty recognized me from a previous time I'd handled some shipping permits for them. We had a polite little chat. Then I handed him the anonymous folder, told him I'd come across some interesting documents that might connect to an unsolved complaint. He gave me a long look, but said he'd pass them on to the relevant department. I thanked him and left. My hands were shaking. The anger had turned into a cold, methodical sense of purpose, and that more than anything scared me. But I also felt relief, like I'd just set something irreversible in motion, and it was exactly what needed to be done. 2 weeks later, I was on my front porch when I saw the police cruiser pull up to a neighboring house. Then another. My wife was in the living room, finishing a phone call, looking irritated. I stepped outside, beer in hand, leaning against the porch railing. My heart hammered. I'd known this was coming, but the reality of it drove a spike of adrenaline through me. Luke walked out of a car parked across the street, 2 officers flanking him. They were talking. He looked agitated. My wife had just come onto the porch, presumably to see what the commotion was about. Her eyes landed on him, and she gasped. She called out his name, voice cracking. That was my confirmation. The last little piece I needed to know for sure. She recognized him. She cared enough to cry out. I took a swig of my beer, feigning indifference, though my heart pounded so hard I thought my chest might explode. She ran barefoot across the lawn, ignoring the prick of dry grass, her hair disheveled, face etched in panic. I stood back, letting it all happen. The officers told him something. I couldn't hear it clearly, but he looked at her with wide eyes and tried to protest. His voice carried. I didn't do it, man. That was dismissed. Come on. The cops guided him into the back seat, and he cursed at them. My wife was near tears, demanding an explanation. I didn't move, just watched. Then, right before they drove off, he turned to her, eyes wild, and shouted, "Who set me up?" She just stood there, hands trembling, tears threatening to fall. But I think she knew, deep down, exactly who had. She glanced back at me, and in that moment, our eyes locked. I didn't blink, didn't say a word. And in her face, I saw everything collapse. Realization, horror, betrayal, a new kind of betrayal. Hers had been emotional, physical. Mine was a betrayal of trust, but more final, more punishing. A wave of silence settled over our suburban street as the cruiser pulled away, lights flashing. She slowly came back to the porch, looking like a lost child. Her cheeks were pale, her shoulders sagged. She opened her mouth, but no words came. I kept my gaze on her. Took another slow sip of my beer. Why? She finally managed to croak, voice shaky. I set the empty bottle on the railing. My voice was calm, too calm. You sank us for a couple glasses of wine and a cheap thrill. This is me swimming back to the surface. She stood there in shock, For a split second, I thought she might strike me or scream at me. Instead, her face crumpled. She choked on her words, almost collapsed onto the porch step. I'd never seen her so broken. Strange, how revenge can look so ugly in real life, even when you think it's justified. That night, she slept, or tried to, alone in the guest room again. I spent the hours pacing the living room, thinking, trying not to feel. It dawned on me that I had effectively shattered both of our lives, not just hers or her lover's. There was a heaviness in my stomach. This was what men talked about in hushed tones, the unstoppable momentum of betrayal, and the sense that everything you thought you knew was a lie. But also a weird sense of liberation, a knowledge that I could never go back to the man I was. For better or worse, I'd stepped over a line. She tried to apologize the next morning, tried to talk about repairing the damage. She even brought up therapy, said we could try marriage counseling. I stared at her, noticing how red her eyes were, how small she looked in her robe. A part of me felt a twisted satisfaction that she was finally in pain. But another part, maybe a part that still cared, felt hollow, because I knew there was no going back. I told her softly, "We're done." She didn't argue. She didn't say a word. She just nodded, tears glimmering on her lashes, face contorted in grief. We coexisted in the house for a few more days, drifting like ghosts. She hardly left her room, missing work, ignoring phone calls. I was mostly numb, though every so often I'd snap at her for no reason or slam a door so hard the walls rattled. The day the official charges went through, I saw a letter for Luke in the mail. Some leftover subscription or alumni notice. I shoved it in the trash with a hard jerk of my wrist. That anger hadn't fully died. But there was another emotion creeping in, an odd relief. Mistrust and heartbreak weigh you down like chains. I was starting to feel them lighten. A few weeks passed. The cops came by to ask more questions. I gave them polite, minimal answers, played the part of the unconnected neighbor. They didn't suspect anything, or if they did, they had no proof. My wife was nearly silent whenever they appeared. She looked like a shell of the woman I married. I think the sheer guilt was devouring her from the inside out. She'd see my ring on the nightstand, where I kept it to remind her of what she'd thrown away, and break down crying in the hallway, stifling sobs behind her hands. I never once tried to comfort her. Eventually, the day came when the bail hearing was set, and Luke's name appeared in the local news. She didn't watch, but I did. Saw his scowling face in the footage. Heard the anchor mention that new evidence has been provided to authorities. They used words like disturbing allegations and past misconduct. My phone buzzed with calls from a couple acquaintances, but I ignored them. This wasn't something I wanted to discuss. Later that night, she tried to approach me again. She'd showered and put on a fresh blouse, but her eyes were swollen from crying. The hallway was dim, lit by a single lamp. "Do you hate me now?" she whispered. I looked at her for a long moment. "Hate you?" I repeated, as though the concept was foreign. "No," I said quietly. "I don't hate you. I just see you differently." She inhaled sharply, tears threatening to fall again. I never meant for any of this. I cut her off with a soft voice. "Don't." That single word made her mouth snap shut. We stood there, inches apart, but feeling like we were on opposite ends of a canyon. "It's not hate," I continued, my tone measured. It's realizing what you're capable of, and realizing what I'm capable of. That's all." Her eyes flickered with recognition. Maybe it dawned on her. The quiet man she thought she knew had found a darker path. Had taken it without hesitation. She nodded once, stepping back from me, shoulders trembling. She said nothing else, just disappeared into the guest room. Now that some time has passed, I can tell you that final unraveling was swift and brutal. We spoke only through practicalities, dividing accounts, canceling joint bills, contacting the lawyer for the official separation. She asked if we might try to fix things, or at least salvage the marriage in some form. I gave her a level stare and said softly, "You shot that in the head when you went to that hotel." She didn't bring it up again. On a random Tuesday morning, she packed up some of her stuff and left. I'm not even sure where she went. To a motel, a friend's house, I didn't care. The only sign she'd been there at all was the half-empty closet, the faint smell of her perfume, and the shape of her name on the maillocks. She left her wedding ring on the dining table. A silent surrender. As for Luke, the last I heard, the police continued investigating him. Another witness came forward, and the state decided to press charges. I don't know how his trial ended. Maybe he's out on bail, or maybe he's stuck in a detention center. The details no longer matter to me. Once I set that plan in motion, I realized it was enough just to ensure he faced the consequences of his own reckless life. My part was done. He was the kind of guy who courted trouble. It was only a matter of time before it caught up with him. Sometimes, the neighbors ask about my wife. They remember our wedding barbecue in the backyard, how she used to laugh at the neighborhood kids playing with sparklers. I just shrug and say we grew apart. They sense there's more to the story, but no one wants to push it. Small talk remains politely on the surface. In the evenings, I sit on the porch with a cold beer. The weather's been cooler now, and the sky often turns that soft pink-orange before dusk. Sometimes I think about how I used to watch her silhouette in the window, the shape of her figure as she brushed her hair. Sometimes I still feel that sting, the final twist of the knife, but mostly, I feel vacant, as if the heartbreak left a wide, hollow space, and all that's left is an echo of what used to be a dream. But I also feel something else, a clarity, a resolution, the kind that says, this is over, one way or another. Every so often, I think back to that moment on the porch, watching the cops lead him away, seeing the confusion and panic on her face. I know plenty of folks would call me cruel, but if they'd lived the moment I did, seeing her slip away into the arms of a younger man, ignoring my life, my love, my trust, they might understand. Mistrust poisons everything it touches. I think men, especially older men, learn that no matter how calmly you try to handle it, betrayal can unleash a feral, vengeful side you never wanted to see. And once that beast is out, you don't just lock it up again. You learn to live with the choice you made. I remember the first time she called me her only one. We were lying under a cheap blanket, in a cheap apartment, dreaming big about our future. I used to believe you could hold on to that moment forever, that no amount of time or stress would dull the memory. But it's a warm summer photo that fades around the edges as the years pass. Now it's nearly unrecognizable. I still think about it sometimes. That quiet ache remains, but it doesn't own me. Life goes on in strange ways, even after it's been blown apart. I can't say I regret what I did. It's more like a clean break, a cut that might scar but won't continue festering. Mistrust, betrayal, anger, vengeance. Maybe they're all just steps on the road to a new life, a new identity. And that new identity, for me, is a man who won't ever again accept being somebody's option, somebody's fallback plan. I'm done with illusions. Not long ago, I found an old picture in a shoebox. Me and her at a carnival, arms around each other, big grins on our faces. My heart twisted at the sight. But I set it aside without tears. If love can be bought for a salmon tartare or $1,000 bottle of wine, was it even love to begin with? If you ask me now if I'd do it differently, I might. Maybe. But I can't change the facts. What's done is done, and I'll shoulder that weight. I've got no illusions about being a hero. I'm just a man who got shoved over the edge. And it turned out there was no bottom, just a free fall. And then, eventually, a landing you'd never want to experience again. I guess, in the end, that's what revenge is. Not repayment, but liberation. I look at that empty space in our closet sometimes, and I think about how soon, after I get my papers in order, I'll leave this house, start fresh somewhere else. Maybe a smaller place in the suburbs, maybe closer to my folks in Montana. A place where the nights are quieter and the air is clear. Or maybe I'll pack up completely, head west, find a cabin near the mountains I grew up around. The world feels oddly open now. There's one thing I'm sure of. Next time I meet someone, if that ever happens, I'll choose differently. I'll pay attention to the subtle shifts, the words left unsaid, the quiet signals that something isn't right. I won't let complacency blind me, because life's too short to live in illusions. If your partner is going to sell your marriage for a fancy meal and a younger body, you'd better catch it early or you'll end up holding a whole lot of shattered pieces. When I can't sleep, I walk around the house, running my hand along the furniture we once picked out together, the walls we painted a soft shade of cream. I pass the guest room, her room, and feel the tension in the stillness. It's as if the house itself is waiting for something. An apology, a final goodbye, maybe an explanation of how we went from being best friends to sworn strangers. But there is no explaining that. You can't articulate how a seed of betrayal grows in silence until it breaks the surface. All you know is that once it does, it never really goes away. Sometimes, I wish I could tell the younger version of me to hold her closer, ask her what she truly needed, see if I could have saved us from all this. But regret is just regret. It doesn't solve anything. I exhale, close my eyes, and remind myself, she made a choice. So did I. That's the truth of it. I'm free now. Free from the illusions, free from the fear of being blindsided again. My anger has dimmed to a slow burn, but I know it'll flicker back to life if I dwell too long on the memory of her, and that boyish grin she found so captivating. So I don't linger there. I turn off the lights, go back to bed, and stare at the empty space where she used to lie. I drift off with the quiet hum of night in my ears, remembering her words. It's not your business. And I realize now, with a hollow sort of amusement, maybe none of it was my business. Maybe she was already gone long before I even noticed, living in some separate reality where I didn't belong. But I made it my business the moment she ripped apart our vows. And I followed through to the bitter end. Our 6th anniversary was the last chance, I suppose. She might call it a stroke of fate, or say I was too distant for too long, that we lost our spark, and she was searching for something to fill the void. I don't care about the excuses. I just know that on that night, in that expensive French restaurant, she sealed her fate. And his. So that's how it ends. She sleeps alone, with guilt she can never wash away. Luke's facing charges he should have faced long ago. And me. I stand on my porch in the evening air, feeling the cool breeze on my face, staring at the horizon where the sun sets behind the row of trees. Sometimes, I close my eyes and let the final threads of anger slip away. I'm not sure if it's true peace, but it's the closest thing to peace I've felt in a long time. I finish my beer, set the bottle aside, and nod to myself. Maybe this is what I've been needing all along. The knowledge that no matter how deep I sank into heartbreak, I managed to swim my way out. Scared, yes. Wiser, definitely. And I'm done letting illusions rule my life. The next time I love, if there ever is a next time, I'll make damn sure it's not built on false words and easy betrayals. I take one last look at the darkened windows of this house, a place that once held all my hopes. Maybe it still holds a few lonely ghosts, but it doesn't hold me anymore. And that perhaps is what true freedom really is. I won't wear her betrayal like a permanent brand. I'll wear it like a scar that closed up, a story told and done, a lesson etched into my bones. I'm not the same man who believed her when she said I was the only one. But maybe that's for the best, because now I know better, and I'm never going back.